Hello, I'm delighted to be here to talk about identity theft and financial crimes. These were used to be called paper cases. They really should be called digital records cases now. And unlike the old world of paper cases, these types of cases are really street crimes. They're coming into prosecutor offices every day in the form of summary arrests for things like using stolen or forged credit or debit cards, forged checks, opening financial accounts, using a person's identity information, etc. So they're coming into offices and they're being assigned often to junior prosecutors. There's another way these cases frequently come in too, unlike most other street crime type cases, which is the pre-arrest scenario. And as you well know, many of these cases are not discovered until after the crime is committed. The victim finds out there was a transaction on their account or an account opened in their identity. And there's also a subset of these cases that involve domestic violence or stalking situations, but result in similar charges of identity theft or misuse of personal information for different types of frauds. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So in the summary arrest situation, I've kind of laid out here the general steps a case like this might go through, but for time purposes, the things I would zero in on are the fact that these cases typically involve a unique subset of witnesses compared to other cases. Of course, they're the victims, but we're also talking about bank tellers, retailer employees, the eyewitnesses within the scenario where these crimes occurred, and often an expert of some type to explain why something is a forgery or why a certain type of transaction was a fraud. And these cases, even the simplest ones, are going to require records of different kinds. The victim's financial account records, the records of the fraudulent transactions that come from the retailers or the banks or the other financial institutions. There's always communication records, whether it's texts or emails or things like that, because it's highly unusual that the perpetrators of these crimes are doing them alone. They're typically working with groups or rings of some kind. And so we're also talking about search warrants, even in simple cases, for the devices these criminals have on them when they're arrested in a summary situation, and for the content of communications, texts, emails, etc., that may become relevant. And then a key step is analyzing all these records and figuring out what evidence is in them. And very often that process reveals there are other phone accounts or other financial accounts that are impacted. And now we're talking about another round of subpoenas and another round of analysis. And so even a simple case can require some very labor-intensive records work. And of course, once that work is underway, it is quite common that it reveals that this particular summary arrest case was just the tip of an iceberg, that this group of offenders or particular offender committed other financial crimes involving this victim, or they have numerous victims they've been doing this scam with, etc. And then we're moving this case possibly into the type of pre-trial, pre-arrest situation that is the other pathway these cases come into the office. So the next slide, please. So when we have a pre-arrest situation, either depending on the size of the office, but either law enforcement has received a report of a fraud of some kind, unknown offender, it happened online, it happened a month ago, or your office is proactively looking into these cases, there's a whole pre-arrest stage. And depending on how your office works, your prosecutors may be directly involved in this, or they may be assisting law enforcement investigators with subpoena work and things like that. But again, we're talking about heavy records evidence to prove these cases. And it may be rounds of this evidence as well as all the analysis and search warrant work and all of that. But assuming that work for the moment leads to evidence of a provable crime, next slide, please. Now you are in the prosecution phase of these cases and you're dealing with charging decisions, which can be quite complex. Who can be charged and with what based on this evidence? Are these crimes that can be charged in your jurisdiction? Because of the online nature of these cases, there's very often multiple jurisdictions involved, and it can be a thorny tangle to figure out not only whether you should be charging it or whether you legally can. But if you are moving forward and it's one of these pre-arrest situations, you're probably talking about a grand jury phase, an arrest warrant. And if it's a one-person case, okay, it's, you know, going through the arrest stages and heading into the regular prosecution phases. But some of these cases end up being multi-defendant, multi-jurisdictional, and you may be planning some kind of multi-jurisdictional takedown similar to a narcotics case with all the steps and decisions that have to go into that. So in terms of analyze from a sufficiency perspective, even a simple case assigned to a junior prosecutor can require many more hours of work than even a robbery, you know, perhaps a more serious violent case, just by the nature of the work that is needed to develop the evidence and move forward with the prosecution.